The secret the ego doesn't want you to know. The ego, my friends, is a master of illusion. It convinces us that we are separate, that we are isolated entities, existing independently of everything around us. It whispers in our minds that we must fight for control, that we must shape the world in our image, and yet this very pursuit of control is the source of much of our suffering. You see, the ego thrives on the idea that we can dominate, but the deeper truth, the secret it doesn't want you to know, is this: we are not in control. We are part of a greater flow, a vast interconnected web of existence. To think that we can control this flow is like a wave trying to control the ocean. The wave is the ocean, and the ocean is the wave. We are not separate from the world around us. We are it. But the ego, in its fear of losing its grip, keeps us searching for something outside of ourselves to define us. We look for our identity in our possessions, in our achievements, in the roles we play, and yet these things only serve to deepen the sense of separation. The more we seek outside of ourselves, the more we feel incomplete. But here lies the paradox. The secret the ego does not want you to know is that you do not need to search for your identity at all. You are already whole. You do not need to become anything because you are already everything. The search for meaning, the search for self, is what keeps you trapped in the illusion. The key to freedom lies not in finding yourself, but in letting go. Let go of the need to define yourself, to hold on to a rigid identity, and simply accept the flow of life as it is. You see, the ego's greatest fear is its own demise, its own dissolution, and yet the secret the ego does not want you to know is that death is not an end. It is not something to fear. It is a transformation, a return to the greater whole from which you came. The ego's fear of death is the greatest lie it feeds you. Death is but a part of the endless cycle, a change, not an end. This fear of death, this resistance to the natural flow, keeps us attached. The more we cling to the desires, the identities, the illusions the ego provides, the more we suffer. The paradox of attachment is that the more we hold on, the more we become trapped. When we let go, we allow the river to carry us, we allow the flow of life to guide us. In that surrender there is freedom. When we stop resisting life, when we stop trying to force it into the shape the ego demands, we begin to see the beauty that is already here. We begin to see that the secret to peace, to contentment, lies not in holding on to things, but in releasing them. The more we resist, the more we suffer. The more we let go, the more we live. The ego lives in the illusion of separation. It wants you to believe that you are alone, that you are disconnected from the world, from others, from the universe itself. But the truth, the secret the ego doesn't want you to know, is that you are not separate. You are part of a grand cosmic dance. You are the universe experiencing itself through you. And so, the greatest liberation comes not from feeding the ego, but from letting it go, from releasing the need to control, the need to define, and instead allowing yourself to flow with the current of life. In that surrender you will find your true freedom. The ego will resist, it will fight, but the truth is simple: you are already free. All you need to do is let go and realize that you are not the ego. You are the vast boundless awareness that is beyond all illusion. Let go and you will see. Let go and you will be. The illusion of control is one of the most pervasive and deceptive aspects of human life. We live in a world where we are constantly told that we can control our circumstances, our lives, and the world around us. We are taught from an early age to strive for mastery, to make things happen, to seize control. Yet, the deeper truth, the truth that we are often reluctant to face, is that control is nothing more than an illusion, a fleeting fantasy that we hold on to in the hope that it will provide us with stability, security, and meaning. Now, this is not to say that we do not have influence over our lives or the events that occur around us. Of course, there are choices we make, actions we take, and consequences that follow. But what we fail to recognize, what the ego refuses to acknowledge, is the greater context within which we live. We are not solitary, isolated beings with absolute power over the unfolding of reality. We are part of an intricate, interconnected web of existence, a vast cosmic dance that is ever flowing, ever changing, beyond the grasp of the small, isolated self. This idea of control is a product of the ego, that part of us that constantly seeks to assert itself, to carve out an identity, to shape the world according to its desire. The ego believes that if it can hold on to control, if it can manage the variables of life, it will be safe, it will be secure. But in truth, the more we try to control, the more we entrench ourselves in fear, anxiety, and stress. We become anxious about what might happen next. We cling to the need for things to unfold in a certain way, and in doing so, we cut ourselves off from the natural flow of life. Life, as it turns out, is not something that can be controlled. It is not a machine that can be manipulated or bent to our will. Life is a process, a continuous unfolding of moments, each one leading to the next in ways that we cannot predict or fully understand. To think that we can control life is like a leaf trying to control the wind, or a drop of water trying to control the flow of the river. The more the leaf struggles, the more it is at the mercy of the wind. The more the drop of water resists, the more it is swept along in the current. And yet, this very struggle, this attempt to assert control, is what causes much of our suffering. We find ourselves in constant conflict with life, with the way things are. We want things to be different, to fit into the narrow confines of our expectations. But life is not interested in our plans, our schedules, or our desires. Life is a flow, a movement that does not adhere to the rigid structure of our ego's demands. When we try to force things into our idea of how they should be, we become frustrated, resentful, and disconnected from the present moment. The irony, however, is that in the very act of trying to control, we often lose touch with the only thing we truly have control over, our response to the present moment. We cannot control what happens in the world, but we can control how we choose to engage with it. We cannot control the actions of others, but we can choose how we respond to them. We cannot control the future, but we can choose to live fully in the present, and it is in this moment, in this space of presence, that true freedom lies. Freedom does not come from controlling life, it comes from surrendering to it. It comes from the realization that control is an illusion, a fantasy that only limits us. When we stop trying to control, when we let go of the need to manipulate and shape everything around us, we open ourselves up to something far greater, the natural flow of life. Life itself is not something to be controlled, but something to be experienced, to be embraced, to be lived in its fullest expression. The moment we stop fighting against life, we begin to experience the beauty, the richness, and the depth that has always been present. The moment we release our grip on control, we find ourselves in a state of harmony with the world around us. We become part of the dance, not a rigid observer on the outside, but a living, breathing participant in the grand unfolding. It is only when we let go of control that we can truly experience the wonder of what is. We can let go of the need to make things happen, and instead allow things to unfold naturally as they always do. The truth is, we are not separate from life. We are not individuals apart from the flow of existence. We are the flow, we are the dance, we are the very movement of life itself. And the more we understand this, the more we release our attachment to control, the more we come to realize that control was never ours to have in the first place. It was always an illusion, a trick of the mind, a story we told ourselves to feel safe. But when we let go of the story, we enter into the reality of life as it is, and in that space we find peace, we find freedom, and we find our true selves. The search for identity is perhaps one of the most profound and elusive pursuits of the human experience. From the moment we are born, we are thrust into a world where we are expected to define ourselves, to determine who we are, and to carve out a place for ourselves in the vast tapestry of life. The search for identity is not just a quest for a name or a title, but for meaning, purpose, and belonging. It is a journey that seems to follow us from childhood into adulthood, an endless quest to understand who we are, what we are meant to do, and where we fit within the grand scheme of existence. Yet the more we search, the more we discover that the answer we seek is always just out of reach. The ego, that part of us that constantly strives for definition, tells us that we must identify ourselves by external labels, by our job, our family, our accomplishments, our possessions. We are taught that we must create an image of ourselves that is distinct, that stands out, that is separate from the rest of the world. We define ourselves by what we do, by what we have, by how others see us. But in doing so, we end up creating an identity that is limited, one that is based on external factors that are fleeting, ever-changing, and ultimately empty. The truth, however, is that identity, as we understand it, is an illusion. It is a construct of the mind, a story that we tell ourselves to make sense of the world. The more we attach ourselves to these labels and definitions, the more we become trapped in a cycle of constant striving and dissatisfaction. We are always searching for something more, something to define us, to give us purpose, to fill the void within. But the deeper we look, the more we realize that what we seek is not something that can be found outside of ourselves. It is not something that can be grasped or acquired. It is something that must be uncovered, revealed through a process of letting go. The search for identity is, in many ways, a search for permanence. We long for something that is unchanging, something that will give us stability in an ever-shifting world. We want to know who we are, to feel that we have a clear sense of self that will remain constant no matter what happens. But life does not operate in such a way. Life is fluid, ever-changing, and impermanent. To define ourselves by any single aspect of our being is to ignore the fact that we are constantly evolving, constantly growing, constantly shifting. The person you were yesterday is not the person you are today, and the person you are today will not be the person you will be tomorrow. And yet we continue to search for an identity that will give us a sense of permanence in a world that is anything but. The ego, in its search for identity, tries to capture a moment, to hold on to something that is fleeting and ephemeral. It creates stories, constructs elaborate narratives of who we are and what we should be. But the more we cling to these stories, the more we lose touch with the truth of who we are. The truth is that we are not our stories, we are not our accomplishments, we are not our roles or our titles. We are not the sum of our experiences or the labels others place upon us. We are the awareness that exists behind it all, the observer of the story, the witness to the ever-changing dance of life. When we stop searching for an identity, when we let go of the need to define ourselves by external measures, we begin to uncover the deeper truth that has always been within us. We realize that we are not separate from the world, but an integral part of it. We are not individuals trying to make our mark, but expressions of the same universal energy that flows through all things. Our true identity is not something that can be grasped or understood through the lens of the ego. It is something that can only be experienced in the present moment, in the stillness between thoughts, in the silence beneath the noise of the mind. The search for identity is not about finding a fixed point, a static image of who we are. It is about recognizing that we are the process itself. We are not something to be found, but something that is constantly unfolding, constantly becoming. The moment we stop searching for a fixed identity is the moment we come to realize that we are already whole, already complete, already at home in the universe. There is nothing to prove, nothing to achieve, nothing to become. We are simply being, and in that being we discover the truth of who we really are. In the end, the search for identity is not about finding something outside of ourselves. It is about letting go of the need to define, to label, to separate. It is about embracing the mystery of life, allowing ourselves to be a part of the flow, to dissolve the boundaries that the ego so desperately tries to maintain. When we do this, we find that our true identity is not something that can be captured or held. It is something that is alive, dynamic, and ever-changing, reflection of the vast, interconnected whole of existence. We are not separate from life, we are life itself. Acceptance is a concept that is often misunderstood, misrepresented, and undervalued. We live in a world where the ego constantly pushes us to resist, to fight, to change things, to make them fit into our own narrow understanding of how they should be. It tells us that we must control, manipulate, or alter our circumstances to feel good about ourselves, to feel validated, or to feel at peace. The idea that acceptance could be a powerful tool in overcoming this constant struggle seems almost counterintuitive, and yet the power of acceptance is one of the most transformative and liberating forces we can experience in our lives. The first thing to understand about acceptance is that it is not about giving up or resigning yourself to a life of passivity. Acceptance does not mean that you are condoning everything that happens to you or around you, nor does it mean you are surrendering to circumstances that may not serve you. In fact, it is the opposite. Acceptance is about acknowledging reality as it is, without resistance or judgment. It is about recognizing the present moment and allowing it to be exactly what it is, without the need to change it or make it something different. The ego, of course, does not like acceptance. The ego thrives on resistance. It tells us that we must fight against the world, that we must constantly strive for control, for dominance, for a sense of security that it believes can be obtained only through manipulation. The ego creates a narrative in which we are separate from everything around us, in which the world exists to serve our desires and needs. It tells us that if things don't go our way, we have somehow failed, that we must correct the situation, bend the world to our will. But the more we resist, the more we struggle, the more we find ourselves entangled in stress, anxiety, and frustration. The more we try to force life into our preconceived notions of how it should unfold, the more we create tension and suffering. Acceptance, however, is the key that unlocks the door to freedom. When we accept life as it is, when we stop trying to bend it to our will, what we find is that life begins to flow more smoothly. We begin to feel a sense of peace that comes not from controlling the circumstances, but from allowing them to be as they are. This does not mean that we stop acting, stop striving, or stop changing things that we feel need changing. Far from it. Acceptance does not mean inaction, nor does it mean complacency. It means that we stop fighting against reality, against the way things are right now. In accepting what is, we free ourselves from the need to manipulate the present moment, and this creates space for us to respond to it in a more conscious, intentional way. Acceptance is the foundation from which we can then take action that is aligned with the flow of life, rather than in opposition to it. What makes acceptance so powerful is that it takes away the struggle. It liberates us from the tension that comes from trying to control things outside of our control. How often do we find ourselves struggling against the inevitable? How often do we rail against the circumstances of our lives, wishing that things were different, that people were different, that situations would unfold according to our desires? And yet, when we stop fighting against the flow of life and accept things as they are, we release the burden of that struggle. We allow ourselves to move with life rather than against it. This acceptance, however, is not passive. It is active in the sense that it requires a shift in consciousness, a willingness to embrace the unknown, the uncertain, and the impermanent. To accept life as it is means that we no longer seek to escape from the present moment. We no longer wish that things were different, because we realize that the moment as it is holds all the richness and wisdom that we need. In accepting the present moment, we are able to see it for what it truly is, without the distortion of our desires, our fears, or our judgments. The power of acceptance lies in its ability to dissolve the boundaries created by the ego. The ego loves to label, to judge, to separate itself from others, from life, from the world. It thrives on the belief that it is separate, unique, and in control. Acceptance, on the other hand, opens the door to unity. When we accept life as it is, we recognize that we are not separate from it. We are not apart from the world, but one with it. We are part of the grand, interconnected flow of existence, and in that recognition we find peace. The most powerful part of acceptance is that it allows us to let go of our attachment to outcomes. We stop trying to force the world to unfold according to our will, and instead we allow it to unfold naturally with grace. This is not to say that we become passive or indifferent. On the contrary, acceptance frees us to take action that is in harmony with life. When we stop fighting against the current, we can begin to flow with it, to move in a way that is aligned with the natural order of things. In the end, the power of acceptance lies in its simplicity. It is the recognition that we are not in control, and that trying to control life only brings suffering. It is the recognition that the present moment is all we have, and that by accepting it fully, we unlock the door to true peace, freedom, and joy. When we accept life as it is, we allow ourselves to be free. Experience life as it was meant to be experienced, not through the lens of the ego's desires, but in the fullness of the present moment as part of the whole. Acceptance is the key to liberation, for in accepting the world, we come to realize that the world is us. The ego, in its ever-present grasp for control, certainty, and permanence, is deeply intertwined with our fear of death. It is the ego that clings to life, that seeks to avoid the inevitable, that imagines itself to be separate from the rest of the universe, somehow exempt from the natural flow of existence. The fear of death is not merely a fear of the end of life, it is the fear of the end of the ego itself, the end of the false sense of self that we have so carefully constructed over the years. The ego is terrified of death because it knows, deep down, that its very existence is a fragile illusion. In its essence, the ego is the mind's attempt to create a solid, unchanging identity. It convinces us that we are individuals, separate from the world and from others. It builds walls around us, creating boundaries that define who we are and who we are not. And it thrives on the belief that we are distinct, unique, and permanent. But death as we traditionally understand it, poses a direct challenge to this illusion. For the ego, death represents the ultimate destruction, the end of all that it holds dear. It is the dissolution of the identity it has fought so hard to protect, and so the fear of death is born. This fear is not necessarily the fear of pain or suffering. It is the fear of non-existence, the fear of ceasing to be. The ego cannot fathom a state of being without itself. It cannot conceive of a world in which I am not the center of attention, a world in which I am no longer present, no longer separate, no longer defined. The ego is terrified of disappearing, of becoming nothing, and in this fear we are caught in a perpetual struggle against the natural process of life and death, a struggle that keeps us from experiencing the deeper truth of existence. The fear of death often manifests in many ways throughout our lives. We become preoccupied with preserving our bodies, our possessions, our reputation, and our achievements. We cling to relationships, we chase after status, we accumulate wealth, all in an attempt to stave off the inevitable, to make ourselves feel more permanent, more secure. And yet, no matter how much we accumulate or how hard we try to control our circumstances, the one thing we cannot control is the moment of our death. It remains a mystery, a reminder that we are not in control, that life is not a product of our will, but of a far greater flow. What the ego fails to understand is that death is not the end, but a transformation, a natural part of the cycle of life. The fear of death arises because the ego sees it as the ultimate destruction, the end of everything that I am. But in truth, death is not the annihilation of the self. It is the cessation of the false self, the ego, which has always been an illusion. We are not the ego, we are the awareness that witnesses the passing of time, the coming and going of thoughts, feelings, and experiences. When we begin to realize that we are not the ego, but the consciousness that observes it, the fear of death begins to lose its grip. We understand that death is not the end of our existence, but a transition into a new form of being. The ego may die, but the awareness, the consciousness that we are, is eternal. It cannot be destroyed because it is not a thing that can be grasped or held. It is the very presence of being, the stillness behind the fluctuations of the mind. This recognition is liberating. It frees us from the clutches of the ego and its endless pursuit of control. It allows us to live fully in the present moment, knowing that life and death are not separate, but two sides of the same coin. They are part of the same process, the same natural flow. When we stop seeing death as an enemy to be feared, and instead recognize it as a natural part of the cycle of existence, we can live without the constant shadow of fear hanging over us. The ego's fear of death keeps us locked in a mindset of scarcity, of limitation, of lack. We are constantly trying to hold on, to secure ourselves against the inevitable, but in truth there is nothing to fear. Death is not an event, it is a transition, a return to the oneness that we have always been a part of. The ego's fight against death is like a wave trying to resist returning to the ocean from which it came. The wave is the ocean. It has never been separate from it. And so, in the same way, we are the universe, and we are not separate from it. To transcend the fear of death, we must come to terms with the impermanence of the ego. We must recognize that our true essence is not bound by time or space, by life or death. We are not the body, we are not the mind, we are the awareness behind all things. When we understand this, we cease to fear death because we know that it is simply the dissolution of an illusion, and the continuation of our true nature. In the end, the ego and its fear of death are two sides of the same coin. The ego thrives on the belief in its permanence, and it fears the dissolution of that belief. But when we see through this illusion, we recognize that death is not the end, but a transformation into something far greater, a return to the oneness from which we came. The fear of death, then, is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. It is a reminder that we are not the ego, but the eternal awareness that is always present, always here, always now. The paradox of attachment lies in its dual nature. It is both the source of our greatest joy and the cause of our deepest suffering. We attach ourselves to people, to things, to ideas, believing that through these attachments we will find security, meaning, and a sense of permanence. And yet, the more tightly we cling, the more we tie ourselves to the very things that are fleeting, transient, and beyond our control. In our pursuit of stability, we create instability. In our desire to find lasting fulfillment, we set ourselves up for inevitable disappointment. Attachment is a natural part of the human experience. It is through attachment that we create connections, form bonds, and establish a sense of identity. We attach ourselves to our families, our friends, our achievements, and our possessions because they give us a sense of meaning, of purpose, of belonging. These attachments seem to provide us with a foundation upon which we can build our lives. But in doing so, we also create a foundation that is unstable, because everything we attach ourselves to is subject to change. The ego, which thrives on control, desires attachment because it perceives these things as extensions of itself. I am my job, it says. I am my relationships. I am my possessions. The ego sees attachment as a way of defining who we are, of carving out a sense of self in an ever-changing world. But this attachment is a double-edged sword. It promises fulfillment, but it also sets us up for loss. For the very things we cling to are not permanent. People change, relationships evolve, possessions decay, and the world itself is in a constant state of flux. The more tightly we hold on, the more we are bound to experience loss, disappointment, and suffering. The paradox becomes clear when we realize that our attachments, rather than providing us with the security we crave, actually create the very instability we seek to avoid. When we attach ourselves to something, we are, in essence, giving it power over us. We become dependent on it for our sense of well-being, for our happiness, for our sense of self. But the moment that thing changes or disappears, we are left adrift, untethered, vulnerable. We are not only left with the absence of the thing we are attached to, but also with the recognition that our sense of self was never truly grounded in anything solid to begin with. This is where the paradox deepens. Attachment is both the cause of our suffering and the means by which we seek to alleviate it. We attach because we seek happiness, comfort, and meaning, yet it is attachment itself that robs us of these very things. The more we cling to something, the more we create expectations around it, and the more we set ourselves up for disappointment. We place our happiness in the hands of something outside ourselves, and when that thing inevitably changes, we find that our happiness was never truly ours to begin with. It was always contingent on something external, something fragile, something impermanent. The wisdom of non-attachment does not suggest that we should withdraw from life or stop forming connections. It does not mean that we should live without relationships, without love, or without purpose. Non-attachment is not about detachment or indifference. It is about recognizing that everything in life is impermanent, that nothing is truly ours to possess, and that our happiness should not be dependent on any one thing. It is about embracing life with an open hand rather than clutching it with a closed fist. Non-attachment means acknowledging the transient nature of all things and accepting that change is inevitable. It means understanding that our relationships, our possessions, and our achievements are part of a larger flow, and that they are not the source of our true happiness. True peace comes when we no longer need to hold on tightly, when we can allow things to come and go without fear or resistance. We can love deeply, live fully, and engage with the world around us without the need to possess or control it. The paradox, then, is that in letting go of attachment, we find freedom. We are no longer bound by the things we hold on to, and we are free to experience life as it is, without the constant weight of expectations or the fear of loss. In non-attachment, we discover that the source of our fulfillment was never in the things we clung to, but in the very act of letting go, of releasing our grip on the fleeting, and allowing ourselves to be fully present in the moment. When we let go of attachment, we come to realize that our true nature is not defined by anything external. We are not the sum of our possessions, our relationships, or our achievements. We are the awareness that experiences these things, the consciousness that witnesses the ebb and flow of life. In this awareness, we are free from the illusion of control, free from the fear of loss, free from the constant striving to hold on to what we can never truly possess. The paradox of attachment is that, in our efforts to find security and meaning, we often find ourselves trapped in a cycle of clinging, grasping, and suffering. But in the wisdom of non-attachment, we find liberation. We discover that true security and meaning are not found in the things we hold on to, but in our ability to let go and embrace life as it is impermanent, ever-changing, and full of wonder. Attachment, in many ways, is one of the great paradoxes of the human experience. It is both the source of our greatest joy and simultaneously the cause of our deepest suffering. The paradox arises from the fact that while attachment promises security, stability, and fulfillment, it is, in reality, one of the greatest sources of insecurity and instability we can experience. The more tightly we hold on, the more we risk losing ourselves in the very things we seek to possess. The deeper the attachment, the greater the potential for pain. At the heart of attachment is the desire to hold on to what we perceive as essential for our happiness: people, possessions, experiences, or even ideas. We believe that by attaching ourselves to these things, we are securing a sense of identity, permanence, and meaning. The ego thrives on these attachments because they create a sense of control, a sense that we can manipulate the world around us to fit our needs and desires. We become convinced that the things we attach ourselves to are necessary for our well-being, that they define who we are, and that without them we would be lost. However, the paradox is that the very act of attachment creates the conditions for suffering. Attachment binds us to the belief that our happiness is dependent on external circumstances. We attach ourselves to a particular outcome, to a specific person, to an object or status, and in doing so, we become dependent on these things for our sense of self. We invest so much energy in trying to protect and preserve these attachments that we lose sight of the transient, impermanent nature of everything around us. We forget that nothing in life is truly permanent, that all things, whether they be relationships, possessions, or achievements, are subject to change, decay, and eventual loss. When we cling too tightly to something, we create a sense of ownership over it, and with that ownership comes fear, the fear of losing it, the fear of not being enough without it. It is this fear that causes the suffering. The more we attach ourselves, the more we tie our identity to something external, the more we invest our energy into controlling the world to meet our expectations, the more we suffer when those expectations are not met. The attachments we hold dear become the very things that can lead to our pain, frustration, and disappointment. This paradox plays out in almost every aspect of our lives. We form attachments to our loved ones, believing that they are the source of our happiness and fulfillment. But when these relationships change, or when people we care about move on, we are left feeling empty, abandoned, or betrayed. The same is true for material possessions, careers, or personal achievements. We work so hard to secure them, to make them permanent, and yet, in doing so, we invite the very possibility of their loss. And when that loss comes, as it inevitably does, we are faced with the reality that our sense of self was never truly tied to the things we were so attached to. In the face of this paradox, many people respond by trying to hold on even tighter, to make their attachments more secure. We build walls around our relationships, we amass more possessions, we chase after status and recognition, all in an attempt to stave off the inevitable change, loss, and impermanence. But this only creates more tension, more anxiety, and more suffering. The harder we grip, the more we bind ourselves to a cycle of clinging and disappointment. So, how do we navigate this paradox? The answer, ironically, lies not in holding on more tightly, but in letting go. Letting go of our attachment to the outcomes, to the things, to the people, and to the ideas that we believe will provide us with happiness. It does not mean giving up on life or becoming indifferent to the things we care about. Rather, it means acknowledging that our true sense of self, our happiness, and our peace do not depend on anything external. True fulfillment comes from within, from the understanding that we are already complete, already whole, regardless of what we possess or who we are with. Letting go does not mean detaching from the world or withdrawing from relationships, but it does mean allowing life to unfold without the constant grip of expectation. It means embracing the present moment, fully aware of its impermanence, and allowing ourselves to experience life as it comes, without clinging to it, without trying to control it. It is the recognition that, while we may have attachments, we do not need them to define us, to complete us, or to give us meaning. In the end, the paradox of attachment is that in our efforts to possess and control, we only create the conditions for loss. But when we release the need to control, when we let go of our attachments, we open ourselves to the fullness of life as it is. We free ourselves from the grip of fear, and we allow ourselves to experience the richness of existence without the burden of clinging to it. The less we need, the more we have, and in that freedom, we discover a deeper sense of joy, peace, and connection that is not bound by anything external, but is rooted in the eternal truth of who we are. Living without resistance is the art of surrendering to the flow of life, of allowing things to unfold as they will, without the need to control, manipulate, or force outcomes. It is the paradox of embracing life as it comes, not as we think it should be. Most of us live in constant struggle with reality, constantly pushing against what is, as if we could somehow change the course of events with our willpower alone. We resist the present moment, whether it be through anxiety about the future or regret over the past, and in doing so, we miss the richness of the here and now. Resistance comes from the ego, which is always trying to assert control, always trying to impose its will on the world around it. The ego tells us that we must have things a certain way, that life must follow a particular script for us to feel safe, fulfilled, or successful. It convinces us that we must fight against what is, to change the things we cannot control, to bend the world to our desires. But in this constant battle, we only create more tension, more frustration, and more suffering. We spend so much energy resisting the way things are, that we fail to recognize the beauty of what already exists. The truth is, life is constantly changing, constantly in flux. It is an unfolding process that is beyond our control, and yet we resist this very process, believing that we should be able to dictate the terms of our existence. We resist change, we resist discomfort, we resist the unknown, and we resist anything that challenges our preconceived ideas of how life should be. This resistance creates a barrier between us and the world, between us and the present moment. It keeps us stuck in a mental loop of wanting things to be different, of wishing that life could be other than it is. Living without resistance is not about passivity or indifference. It is not about resigning ourselves to a life of inaction or disengagement. Rather, it is about embracing life with an open heart, fully present, fully alive, and accepting things as they are. It is about acknowledging that life is not something to be fought against, but something to be experienced. We don't need to control every moment, because, in truth, we cannot. The more we try to hold on, the more we will suffer, but the more we let go, the more we allow ourselves to be carried by the current of life. Acceptance is the key to living without resistance. It doesn't mean that we have to like everything that happens to us or agree with every circumstance. Acceptance is simply the recognition that things are the way they are, whether we like it or not. When we accept what is, we free ourselves from the burden of resistance. We stop fighting against reality and begin to engage with it in a more harmonious way. We stop trying to change the things we cannot change and instead focus our energy on how we can respond to the present moment. This does not mean we stop striving for our goals or pursuing our passions. It means that we stop clinging to the outcome, stop attaching our happiness to the way things turn out. We can take action, but we take it with a sense of detachment, knowing that the results are not entirely in our hands. We do what we can, but we understand that life may unfold differently than we expect, and that's okay. There is freedom in surrender, freedom in letting go of the need to control everything. When we release resistance, we open ourselves to the flow of life, to the endless possibilities that exist beyond our limited expectations. Living without resistance also means letting go of the resistance within ourselves. It means accepting our own flaws, our own imperfections, and the parts of us that we may have rejected or tried to suppress. So often we resist our own emotions, our own thoughts, or our own experiences, believing that they are somehow wrong or should not be. But when we stop resisting ourselves, we can begin to heal, to grow, and to become more aligned with our true nature. The beauty of living without resistance is that it allows us to experience life more fully. When we stop trying to control every aspect of our existence, we make room for spontaneity, creativity, and joy. We become more open to the unexpected, to the unknown, and to the mysteries that life holds. In letting go, we find a deeper connection to ourselves, to others, and to the universe. We stop being prisoners of our own minds and begin to live from a place of peace and acceptance. Resistance, in the end, is an illusion. It is a mental construct created by the ego that tells us we need to fight, to struggle, to control. But life in its essence does not need to be fought. It is a dance, a flow, a constant movement of energy. When we resist, we block this flow. But when we surrender, when we stop fighting against the current, we allow ourselves to be swept along with it. We become part of the flow of life, rather than separate from it. In this surrender, we discover a deep peace, a profound freedom that comes from living in harmony with the world as it is. To live without resistance is to live in alignment with the present moment, to embrace life with an open heart, and to trust that whatever comes, it is exactly what is needed. It is a life of acceptance, not of resignation, but of recognition, that life is always unfolding, and our role is not to control it, but to participate in it fully with grace, with presence, and with love. The illusion of separation is one of the most pervasive and enduring delusions of the human mind. It is the belief that we are distinct, isolated beings, separate from one another, from the world, and even from the very universe itself. This sense of separation shapes much of our thinking, our actions, and our experience of life. It fuels our egos, creates division between people, and gives rise to fear, conflict, and loneliness. And yet this belief is an illusion so deeply ingrained that we often fail to see through it, trapped in the idea that we are separate from everything else. At the core of the illusion of separation is the ego, that constructed sense of self that defines who we think we are. The ego thrives on the idea that we are individuals, distinct from everything around us, with our own separate identities, desires, and fears. It tells us that we are isolated, that we must protect ourselves, compete with others, and look out for number one. It convinces us that our happiness, our security, and our success depend on maintaining this separation, on holding onto our individuality and distancing ourselves from the rest of the world. But the truth is, the ego's story is a fabrication. It is a mental construct that creates the sense of being an isolated entity, when in reality we are all interconnected. At the deepest level of existence, there is no real separation between us and the world. We are not distinct from the people around us, nor are we separate from the natural world or the vastness of the cosmos. In fact, we are inextricably linked to everything that is, and the illusion of separation is merely a veil that clouds our perception of this profound interconnectedness. Think about the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink. All of these are shared resources, flowing through countless other beings and systems, yet we rarely stop to consider the ways in which our lives are intimately connected with everything around us. Our bodies are made of the same elements that make up the stars, the earth, and the trees. Our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions ripple out and affect others in ways we cannot always comprehend. And yet we continue to live as if we are isolated islands, separated from the very fabric of existence. This illusion of separation leads to a deep sense of disconnection and alienation. We feel disconnected from others, from nature, and even from ourselves. We see ourselves as isolated individuals, struggling to find meaning, purpose, and belonging in a world that seems vast, indifferent, and uncaring. The ego creates this feeling of separateness, convincing us that we are alone in our experience, that we must protect ourselves from the outside world and compete for survival. But when we begin to see through the illusion of separation, we realize that this sense of isolation is a false construct. We are not alone. We are part of a vast, interconnected web of life, a dynamic, ever-changing system in which every part plays a vital role. This understanding shifts our perception of the world, dissolving the walls that the ego has built around us and revealing the truth of our unity with all that is. When we stop seeing ourselves as separate from others, we begin to experience the world differently. We realize that our happiness is not dependent on external circumstances or possessions, but on our connection to the present moment and to everything around us. We stop viewing other people as competitors or threats, and begin to see them as fellow travelers on the same journey. We recognize that their joys, their sorrows, their struggles, and their triumphs are not separate from our own. In this recognition, we find a deep sense of empathy, compassion, and understanding. The illusion of separation also causes us to see the natural world as something out there, separate from us, something we can use, exploit, and control. But when we see through this illusion, we realize that we are not separate from nature. We are nature. The earth is not something we stand apart from. It is our home, our body, our source. The trees, the oceans, the mountains, and the animals are not separate from us. They are part of the same intricate web of life in which we exist. In this realization, we begin to treat the earth with the respect and reverence it deserves, understanding that our actions affect the very fabric of the world we inhabit. The illusion of separation is also at the root of much of the suffering we experience in life. It creates division between us and others, fueling hatred, fear, and misunderstanding. It convinces us that we are separate from those who look different, think differently, or live in different circumstances, leading to judgment, prejudice, and violence. But when we realize that we are all connected, that our fates are intertwined, and that we are part of a shared human experience, the need for division disappears. The barriers that the ego creates fall away, and in their place we find compassion, love, and unity. Living in the awareness that the separation between us and the world is an illusion does not mean that we lose our individuality or our uniqueness. We still experience life as individuals, with our own thoughts, feelings, and perspectives. But we no longer see ourselves as isolated, disconnected entities. We recognize that we are part of a larger whole, and that our actions, our thoughts, and our lives have an impact on the world around us. We begin to live not as separate beings, but as integral parts of the vast and beautiful tapestry of existence. In the end, the illusion of separation is just that, a trick of the mind, a veil that keeps us from seeing the truth of our interconnectedness. When we transcend this illusion, we experience life in its fullest richness, with a deep sense of connection to others, to the earth, and to the universe. We understand that we are not isolated individuals, but part of an ever-expanding, ever-evolving dance of life. And in that understanding, we find peace, freedom, and an unshakable sense of belonging. The freedom in letting go is one of the most profound and transformative experiences a person can have. It is the realization that, in order to truly love, we must release our grip on the things that we believe define us, secure us, or make us feel safe. Letting go, in its deepest sense, is not about abandoning life, but about releasing the attachments and expectations that hold us back from experiencing life fully as it is. In our day-to-day lives, we often find ourselves holding on to countless things, thoughts, emotions, possessions, relationships, and even identities. We attach ourselves to these things because we believe they will bring us happiness, security, or a sense of control. The ego thrives on these attachments, for it tells us that we are who we are because of what we own, what we've accomplished, and what others think of us. We cling to the belief that we need these external things to feel complete, to feel worthy. But in this clinging we create the conditions for suffering. The more we hold on, the more tightly we grip, the more we invite fear and anxiety into our lives. We fear losing what we have, we fear change, we fear the unknown. The ego convinces us that we must protect ourselves, guard our possessions, maintain our identity, and keep everything just as it is. But in doing so, we trap ourselves in a prison of our own making. We become prisoners of our attachments, bound by our need for control, and we miss the inherent freedom that comes from letting go. Letting go is not about abandoning everything we care about. It is about realizing that our happiness does not depend on what we hold, but on our ability to flow with life. When we release the need to control, to possess, to cling, we free ourselves from the constant struggle and tension that arise from trying to maintain things that are ultimately out of our control. We stop grasping at the illusion of permanence and open ourselves to the ever-changing, ever-unfolding nature of existence. This release of control opens the door to profound freedom. We begin to see that life is not something to be mastered or conquered, but something to be lived in a state of flow, of openness. We stop resisting what is and start embracing what is. This doesn't mean that we become passive or indifferent. It means we accept that life is constantly changing, constantly moving, and that we cannot predict or control its course. Letting go is the act of surrendering to the flow of life, knowing that everything is temporary and that we do not need to hold on to anything to find peace. When we let go of our attachments, we experience freedom from fear. Fear is a product of attachment. We fear losing the things we are attached to: our possessions, our relationships, our image, our identity. But when we release those attachments, we no longer need to live in fear of loss, because we understand that everything is impermanent. Our sense of self is no longer bound by external things, and we discover an inner peace that is not dependent on what we have or what we've done. The more we let go, the less we fear. We begin to live with a sense of trust, of surrender, knowing that life will provide what we need when we need it. The freedom in letting go also extends to our emotions. Many of us hold on to old grudges, past hurts and regrets, believing that by holding on to them, we somehow protect ourselves from further pain. We are afraid to let go of our anger, our sadness, or our bitterness, because these emotions have become a part of our identity. But in holding on to them, we only keep ourselves locked in the past, unable to experience the present moment fully. Letting go of these emotions does not mean we deny them, but it means we stop allowing them to define us. We allow ourselves to feel what we feel, to experience our emotions, and then we release them, knowing that they do not need to stay with us forever. Letting go also brings freedom from judgment. We often hold on to rigid ideas about ourselves and others, beliefs about who we are, who others are, and how the world should be. These beliefs limit our ability to truly experience life and to connect with others. They create division, separation, and conflict. When we let go of these judgments, we open ourselves to the richness of the present moment. We stop defining ourselves and others by labels, by past actions, by preconceived ideas. We let go of the need to judge, and in doing so, we create space for love, compassion, and understanding. The freedom in letting go is also the freedom to be fully present. When we are attached to something, our minds are often somewhere else. We are either looking forward to the future or dwelling on the past, constantly thinking about what we want to possess, what we need to achieve, or what we fear losing. But when we let go of our attachments, we free ourselves from this mental clutter. We become more aware of the present moment, more attuned to the world around us. We begin to experience life in a more direct and immediate way, free from the distractions of our desires and fears. Letting go is not an act of weakness or resignation. It is a powerful act of liberation. It is the realization that we do not need to control life to find peace. We do not need to possess, to cling, to define, to resist. We are free when we let go of the illusion of control and allow life to unfold as it will. In that freedom, we find a deeper sense of peace, of joy, and of connection to the world around us. Letting go is the key to experiencing life fully in all its beauty, mystery, and impermanence. It is the freedom to be who we are, without the need to grasp or hold on, and in that freedom we discover a deep and lasting sense of fulfillment.